"You'll get nothing, Dad. You're just a burden now." Those words hit me harder than the wooden pew I'd been gripping moments earlier. I looked up from my hands, still trembling, to see Brandon smirking with all the confidence of a man who thought life owed him everything. Rachel, his sister, giggled behind him. The church smelled of lilies and damp coats, but all I could sense was the icy shame their laughter left behind. I had driven 2 hours from my small home in Cedar Falls to attend what was supposed to be Mom's funeral. The funeral of the woman who had raised me, who had nursed me through illness, who had loved me more than anyone. Yet here I was, my own kids treating me like a stranger, like an intruder in a room that should have been shared by family. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Mom had passed quietly in the night, her hands folded as if in prayer. I had stayed by her side until the very end, reading her favorite poems, holding her hand until it was cold. I thought my children would understand that. I thought they would remember the family we had built, the sacrifices I had made to ensure they had opportunities I never had. But no. The second I stepped into St. Mark's Church, the thin veil of civility I'd hoped for crumbled. Brandon leaned in, voice low and sharp. "We're just being honest, Dad. You don't get anything. Mom wanted us to have it all. You're too old, too slow, too useless." I felt a sharp ache in my chest, deeper than grief, sharper than any knife. I'd spent decades working construction, fixing neighbors' houses, lending a hand to anyone who needed it. And now, my own blood spat at my life's worth. Rachel crossed her arms, her nails clicking against her bouquet. "Honestly, Dad, we love you, but you just don't fit into our plans." Mom made sure of it. I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to unclench. The air smelled of polished wood, of fading perfume, of candle wax, and betrayal. I had to remind myself why I was here. To honor Mom, to stay calm, to listen. But I also knew something they didn't. Mom had a streak of cunning herself, and if she had left anything in writing, anything hidden in plain sight, then their smugness was about to backfire. I took a slow breath. "Let's get through this," I said quietly. "I'm here to remember Mom, not to argue with you." The service went on, hymns echoing in the high, arched ceilings. Brandon and Rachel whispered between themselves, sneering at my bowed head, at my trembling hands. But my mind wandered to the envelope I had found tucked in Mom's Bible weeks before she passed. She had left me a note, just one line. "All will be revealed at the reading." I didn't fully understand it then, but I felt a spark of hope. Mom was always protective of me, even when her other children weren't. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a way to set things right. After the priest finished the eulogy, the funeral home director motioned for us to proceed to the reading room. Brandon and Rachel practically pushed past me, anxious to get to the part they thought would confirm their victory. I followed quietly, my hands in my coat pockets, my eyes scanning the room. There was a long mahogany table at the front, stacks of envelopes waiting, a solemn clerk taking attendance. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear, anger, and anticipation. Ruth, Mom's lawyer, looked up from her notes and gave me a small, encouraging nod. "Tom, it's all here. Just remember to stay calm," Brandon snorted, turning to Rachel. "See? Even the lawyer's on our side. Dad doesn't even know what he's looking at," I forced a smile. "Don't be so sure," I muttered under my breath. As Ruth began reading, the first few names came up. Distant cousins, friends, charitable donations. Brandon and Rachel smirked, sharing small high fives under the table. Then came the moment that made their faces freeze. The envelope marked Tom Avery. Ruth looked up, a faint smile on her lips. And finally, to Tom Avery, her son. She left the entire Elm Street property to him, along with all personal assets. Brandon choked on his own breath. Rachel's bouquet slipped from her hands onto the floor. Their laughter died mid-air, replaced by stunned silence. I felt my knees go weak and my chest lift with a strange warmth. Mom's note had been a promise, and now it was being fulfilled. But as the clerk handed me the deed and the papers, I noticed something strange in Brandon's eyes. That wasn't shock alone, it was fear. And fear in someone who thought they had won is dangerous. I looked at him, calm, steady. Everything Mom had. She wanted me to have, and I intend to honor that. Brandon's lips curled, a plan forming behind his panic. I knew right then the fight was only beginning. The reading was over, but their battle had just started. The ride home from the funeral was quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, heavy and suffocating. Brandon refused to speak, slumping in the passenger seat of his brand-new SUV, while Rachel scowled in the back, scrolling through her phone with a forced sense of indifference. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, thinking about the twists Mom had left me. Even though I now legally owned the Elm Street property, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Greed has a way of driving people to desperation, and I could already sense Brandon and Rachel plotting their next move. When I pulled into my modest home in Cedar Falls, I noticed the mailbox had been tampered with, its flag bent, the lid slightly open. My stomach twisted. Whoever had been at the church might have followed me home. Inside, the familiar smell of old pine furniture and my mother's lingering lavender scent greeted me. It should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded me of why I was here, to protect what was rightfully mine. I set the stack of legal documents on the kitchen table. Ruth had insisted I keep them secure until the court could officially record the property transfer. I glanced through the papers once more, checking every signature, every notary stamp. Everything was perfect, but I knew perfection wouldn't stop Brandon from trying to find a loophole. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think this is over? Think again. The house isn't yours yet." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Ruth had warned me about threats. Brandon wasn't above intimidation. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table trying to steady my thoughts. The next day, I went to the bank to confirm the account transfers Mom had set up. While I was signing paperwork, the teller, a young woman named Jenny who had known me since high school, whispered, "Be careful, Tom. Your kids, they're talking about contesting everything. They think they can outsmart you." I smiled faintly. "Jenny, I've faced worse than greedy children and bad intentions. I'll manage." Yet, even as I reassured myself, the gnawing anxiety persisted. I remembered the way Brandon had laughed at me in church, like he owned the world, like I was powerless. That laugh had been cut from pride, but it revealed desperation too, and desperation is reckless. That evening, I found myself walking the property, the Elm Street house bathed in the soft glow of sunset. Every brick, every shutter, every step of the porch carried memories of Mom's life. Her voice, her laughter, seemed to echo faintly in the halls. I whispered to the wind, "I'll protect this, Mom. No one's taking it from me." But the calm didn't last. That night, a sharp knock at the door startled me. I opened it slowly, peering into the shadows. No one was there, only a single envelope on the welcome mat. I picked it up carefully, recognizing the handwriting. Brandon's. Inside, there was only a note. "We'll see how long you can hold on to what's yours." My hands tightened around the paper. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a warning, a threat, and it meant Brandon had already started moving behind the scenes. The next morning, Ruth called. "Tom, I've already started preparing for a potential contest. Your children are smart, but they're not careful. If they try anything illegal, we'll catch it. But we have to move fast." I nodded, determination settling in. "Let them try. I've kept this family's legacy alive long enough to see this through. They'll learn the hard way." Over the next week, I began noticing small signs. neighbors whispering, Brandon's SUV parked suspiciously down the street, Rachel calling the home office repeatedly. I realized they weren't just angry. They were planning to challenge the will, to question Mom's intent, to paint me as incapable. But I had Ruth, and I had the truth. I decided to confront Brandon directly. I called him, keeping my voice calm and even. Brandon, I said, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're planning, and I want to make it clear. I'm not stepping aside. This property, and Mom's legacy, stays with me. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a tightness in his voice I hadn't heard before. You think you can stop us? He spat finally. You think we'll just roll over? I smiled faintly. No, I know you won't. That's why I'm ready. Even as I hung up, I knew the next moves would be critical. Brandon and Rachel were clever, but they underestimated one thing. I had the law, the truth, and the patience to see justice served. That night, I went to bed with a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting what was rightfully mine and exposing the deceit for all to see. Brandon's smugness at the funeral had only fueled my resolve, and deep down, I knew the final confrontation would come soon, one way or another. The house was mine, but keeping it would require more than papers and signatures. It would require courage, cunning, and the steady patience that only years of life experience can teach. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I felt Mom's presence in the room, a gentle reminder that she had left me with more than a house. She had left me with the means to win, if I stayed true and vigilant. The following morning, I sat at the Elm Street kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the half-open blinds, coffee steaming in my mug. Ruth was on speakerphone, pacing her office, outlining a strategy to counter any attempt Brandon and Rachel might make to contest the will. They'll probably claim Mom wasn't of sound mind, or that the deed was coerced, Ruth said, voice calm but firm. We need witnesses, documents, and a clear timeline proving everything was voluntary and legal. If they push it to court, I want airtight evidence. I nodded, feeling a quiet determination settle over me. I'd spent years being underestimated, by bosses, by neighbors, even by my own children at times, but now I had the upper hand, and I was going to use it. That afternoon, I began retracing Mom's final steps. I visited the Cedar Falls Bank where she kept her safe deposit box. Ruth had advised me to gather all receipts, statements, and correspondence that could prove Mom had intentionally left the property to me. The bank manager, Mr. Whitman, greeted me warmly. "Tom, I've been expecting you," he said, eyes twinkling. "You've got a fight on your hands, huh?" "Seems that way," I admitted. "I just want to make sure Mom's wishes are honored." Whitman nodded and led me to the vault. Inside, there were letters, account statements, and, most importantly, the original property deed with Mom's unmistakable signature. A sense of relief washed over me. This was exactly what I needed. Back at the house, I started organizing the documents. Every signature, every notarization, every correspondence was laid out meticulously. I wanted nothing left to chance. Ruth called periodically to check in, reminding me to keep calm and avoid confrontation until the legal groundwork was complete. But Brandon and Rachel weren't waiting. By midweek, subtle signs of their moves began surfacing. First, a call from a real estate lawyer I had never met, asking if I'd seen the new filings regarding Elm Street. Then, a neighbor mentioned seeing Rachel taking photos of the house and property lines. Their desperation was growing, and it told me something critical. They had no legal grounds to claim anything. They were grasping at straws. That evening, I confronted Brandon at his office. I had chosen my words carefully, keeping my tone calm but deliberate. "Brandon," I began, leaning against the polished desk, "I know you're trying to challenge Mom's will. I also know it won't work. You need to understand, this property, the house, everything Mom left, is mine." She made her wishes very clear. He smirked, trying to mask the panic I could see in his eyes. "You think holding a piece of paper makes you powerful, Dad? You're slow, old, and out of touch. You've got nothing on us." I smiled faintly, almost pitying him. "It's not about speed, son. It's about patience, preparation, and truth. You can scheme all you want, but when the court sees your actions, the outcome won't be what you hope for." He clenched his jaw, and for a brief moment, I saw the edge of fear beneath his arrogance. The next day, Ruth and I started compiling a timeline of Mom's decisions, including bank statements, notarized documents, and emails that proved her intentions. Every detail was cross-referenced, every signature verified. By the end of the week, we had built an airtight case. I also began talking to the neighbors, quietly gathering accounts of Brandon and Rachel's suspicious behavior, visiting the house without permission, questioning gardeners about ownership, trying to pressure friends into supporting their claim. Each witness added weight to the narrative that my children were acting in bad faith. One night, I received another anonymous note slipped under my door. "Stop now, or face consequences. You've been warned." I held it in my hands, feeling a surge of anger. But I didn't let it show. I photographed it, sent it to Ruth, and filed it in my growing evidence folder. I realized then that their threats only strengthened my resolve. "This ends in court," I muttered to myself, "and I'm going to make sure justice is served." That night, as I stared out the living room window at the house bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, I knew the final confrontation would be inevitable. Brandon and Rachel had overplayed their hand. Their arrogance, their greed, their underestimation of me, they would all be exposed. I could almost hear Mom's voice whispering in the wind, reminding me, "Stay patient, stay steady, and the truth will shine." And I was ready. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, the kind of smell that made your skin crawl if you were nervous, or ready for a fight. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, eyes scanning Brandon and Rachel across the aisle. They had tried every trick they could think of. Letters, threats, whispered rumors. But now, under the bright glare of the courtroom lights, their schemes would crumble. Ruth stood beside me, calm and confident. "Tom, just remember, truth and patience are on our side. Everything else will fall into place." I nodded, feeling the weight of months of preparation settle into a quiet determination. Judge Harmon entered, gavel in hand. He was known in Cedar Falls for being precise and impartial, but fair. Today, fairness would work in my favor. "Court is now in session," he said, eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "We are here regarding the contested estate of Margaret Avery." Brandon rose immediately, voice strained but forced smooth. "Your Honor, we believe my father was not of sound mind regarding the Elm Street property. We have evidence he may have influenced Mom." Ruth stood, cutting him off politely but firmly. "Your Honor, that claim is unfounded. Mr. Avery's actions have always been consistent, and all legal documentation confirms that the transfer of Elm Street was entirely voluntary on Margaret Avery's part. We have witnesses, bank statements, and notarized documents that prove intent beyond doubt." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Brandon's eyes darted around, searching for support. But the community seated in the benches, neighbors, old friends, people who had known Mom all their lives, sat in quiet anticipation. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment to reclaim not just my inheritance, but my dignity. Ruth called the first witnesses. The bank manager, Mr. Whitman, detailed the transactions, the notarized documents, and the timeline of Mom's intent. Each detail was precise, leaving no room for doubt. Next, neighbors testified about Brandon and Rachel's unusual behavior, sneaking around the property, making phone calls to anyone who might support their claim, and even attempting to intimidate friends into signing false statements. The courtroom murmured again, and Brandon's confident mask cracked. Finally, Ruth laid out the timeline of Mom's health, the correspondence proving she acted with full understanding, and the hidden note she had left for me. The judge read it aloud. All will be revealed at the reading. Tom must have what is rightfully his. I felt a shiver of vindication as the courtroom went silent. Brandon's jaw tightened. Rachel's hands fidgeted, and the smugness that had greeted me at the funeral evaporated completely. Then Ruth delivered the final blow. She handed the judge the original deed, along with the notarized documents showing Brandon's attempted forgery and Rachel's intimidation attempts. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "not only is the Elm Street property legally Mr. Avery's, but these actions constitute fraud and deliberate interference. The court must act to protect Mr. Avery's rightful inheritance." The gavel struck the bench. Silence fell. Then Judge Harmon spoke. "After reviewing all evidence, this court finds in favor of Tom Avery. The Elm Street property and all associated assets remain his. Any attempts to interfere or falsify documentation will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The courtroom erupted into whispers and soft applause. Brandon sank back in his chair, defeated. Rachel's eyes glistened with tears, not of remorse, but of frustration. I felt a calm wash over me, a weight lifting that had been pressing down for months. I had not just won the property, I had reclaimed my dignity, my name, and the respect that had been denied me. Outside the courthouse, the sun glinted off the wet streets from an earlier rain. Brandon and Rachel left silently, their ambition shattered, their plans destroyed. Rumors later confirmed that their real estate business had begun to crumble. Without credibility, and with the community watching, they had nowhere to hide. I returned to Elm Street that evening, unlocking the door with the deed safely in my pocket. The house smelled of sunlight and old wood, welcoming me home. For the first time since Mom passed, I felt peace. Standing on the porch, I breathed in the crisp Cedar Falls air and thought about the journey. Betrayal had been bitter, and the battle exhausting, but truth had won. And deep down, I knew Mom had guided me through it all. The Elm Street house was quiet that evening, bathed in the golden glow of sunset. I stood in the living room, running my hand along the polished banister Mom had loved. It smelled faintly of her lavender soap, a scent that now carried the weight of memory, justice, and victory. Brandon and Rachel were gone, defeated, humiliated, and exposed. News of their attempts at forgery and intimidation had spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. Their credibility had collapsed, their friends and business partners turning away. In their pursuit of greed, they had lost more than just the property. They had lost the respect of everyone who mattered. I sat down at the kitchen table, Ruth's voice still echoing in my mind. "Justice isn't always fast, Tom, but it's precise. You stayed patient. That's why you won." I poured a cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into my hands, and thought about the long road to this moment. Years of being underestimated, belittled, and ignored had led me here. But the truth, Mom's intent, the legal documents, the unwavering support of neighbors, had triumphed. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace settle in. It wasn't just about winning a house. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the love of a mother who had always believed in me, even when my own children didn't. The following morning, I walked through the house, opening windows to let in the fresh Cedar Falls air. The garden needed work. Mom had always tended it herself, but now it was mine to care for, a living legacy of her love. As I pruned the rose bushes and swept the porch, I thought about the lessons I had learned: patience, courage, and the power of truth. Then, a soft knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Mr. Whitman, the bank manager, holding a small envelope. "Tom," he said with a smile, "just thought you'd like to know, the community has started a fund in your name to help preserve the Elm Street house and garden. People here remember what your mother built and what you protected. I felt tears prick my eyes. It wasn't about money or revenge or proving a point. It was about legacy. The people I had lived among, served, and respected had recognized the justice of it all. That evening, I stood on the porch and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The house, my home, felt alive again. Each creak in the floorboards, each scent of old pine, each shadow cast by the fading light was a reminder. Mom had been right. I had everything I needed to carry her legacy forward. Brandon and Rachel's names had already faded from conversations in town. Their mockery, their threats, their schemes, they had all been swept away by truth and diligence, and I, quietly but firmly, had reclaimed my rightful place, not just as the heir of Elm Street, but as a man who had endured betrayal and emerged with his dignity intact. I smiled, a calm, deep smile. The house wasn't just a building. It was proof that patience, perseverance, and integrity always win in the end. And in that moment, I finally felt free. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.